Hi, my name is Nicola Jennings. I'm Director of Colnaghi Foundation. Welcome to Colnaghi Foundation Lates, talks with interesting people about new art exhibitions, publications and events in the UK and around the world. Today I'm delighted to welcome Professor Babette Bohn, Professor of Art History at TCU College of Fine Art in Fort Worth, Texas. Babette specializes in Renaissance and Baroque art and architecture and feminist art history, and she's published many books and articles and co-curated an exhibition about the Renaissance master Federico Barocci. But today we're going to talk about her interest in women artists. Using the exhibition of Artemisia Gentileschi's paintings at the National Gallery as a jumping off point, Babette, I know you haven't been able to see the exhibition, but do you think the fact that one of the world's major galleries is giving her a solo exhibition marks a significant moment?
Absolutely. I think it's a thrilling development to see that major institutions such as the National Gallery are giving a great artist such as Artemisia Gentileschi the credit that she is due. And I think it's marvelous that she has this solo exhibition, not her first. But I do think we're seeing a growth in interest in women artists. So, for example, the Prado recently housed a wonderful exhibition devoted to two Italian women, Sofonisba Anguissola and Lavinia Fontana, who were both principally active in the 16th century. So major institutions taking an interest is really a step forward in the long overdue attention to women artists, which is not to say that many scholars have not devoted attention to women artists for some time. There was a real turning point in 1989 with the publication of Mary Garrard's monograph on Artemisia Gentileschi, the first major monographic study of the artist. It's supremely frustrating that this is happening during the pandemic, but from the catalog, I think it will be an important contribution to the study of this artist and hopefully to be followed by many further exhibitions and similarly significant studies of other women artists as well.
Because there were many other women artists, weren't there? I mean, that's the surprising thing, some of whom we're only just beginning to hear about. I believe you're just about to publish a book, Women Artists, Their Patrons and Their Publics in Early Modern Bologna, with Pennsylvania University Press. Tell us about that.
Bologna is really, in a nutshell, the answer to what you're commenting on, Nicola, and that is there were lots of women artists. I reckon roughly 150 are recorded during just the 16th and 17th century. The majority of those women are not known today in any surviving works. My book treats, to varying degrees, no fewer than 68 women artists. But Bologna was an exceptional place for women artists, beginning seriously with Lavinia Fontana, who was the first woman painter who functioned as a professional male artist, would have receiving commissions, painting not only commissioned portraits, which was more traditional for women, but also doing altarpieces and other public pictures that she often signed and dated. And I will say, I think one of the contributing factors to the proliferation of surviving works and known figures in Bologna is that at least a few of the major figures, such as Lavinia Fontana and Elisabetta Cerrani, signed probably a majority of their paintings. So with 68 women artists who are recorded during these centuries, it really gave me an opportunity to think more broadly about this thrilling phenomenon of the emergence of professional women artists.
Well, let's talk about why Bologna in a minute, but should we first talk a little bit about a few of the individuals like Lavinia and Elisabetta Cerrani? Nobody really mentioned Lavinia very much until Linda Nochlin and Anne Sutherland Harris had their exhibition in 1976, Women Artists 1550 to 1950, which is extraordinary.
Linda Nochlin and Anne Sutherland Harris deserve a tremendous amount of credit for really launching the study of women artists. I think that is where we really turned a corner. And even a little before that exhibition, Linda Nochlin wrote a famous article, "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" Bologna is a special case in that the first recorded woman artist, and when I say recorded, I mean by name, we know who she was, is a Franciscan nun whose name was Caterina Vigri. And Vigri was really not a professional painter, but I think her example was highly influential, not so much for the caliber of her works, but she sanitized the vocation of painter for women artists in Bologna in a way that I don't think occurred, at least not to my knowledge, for any other early modern Italian city. And she slowly gained some successors. In the early 16th century, we have one recorded woman who was active as a sculptor. As far as we know, Properzia de Rossi is the only Italian woman by whom we actually do have surviving sculptures in marble. We don't know who trained her as an artist. She doesn't seem to have come from an artistic family. So, she's mysterious. And with her, too, we have very few reliably autographed surviving works, apart from a marvelous marble relief sculpture that was made for the Basilica of San Petronio that shows Josephine Potiphar's wife. She was the one woman who made the cut in Vasari's first edition of his Lives of the Artists, biographies of 142 artists, and one of them was a woman. But Vasari actually has a very limited amount of information about Properzia de Rossi, and that has contributed to the limitations in our knowledge about her works today. Most of her works are lost. Lavinia Fontana is the next major artist in Bologna by whom we actually do have surviving works, and she's a painter. Most recorded women artists in early modern Italy, in Bologna, as in every other city, seem to be painters. I mean, it's of course also true that most recorded artists generally from this period seem to be painters. She was the daughter of a successful painter in the city. She produced over 100 paintings that are still known today. We even have a small group of drawings, and a really critical point, we have a superb early biography of Lavinia Fontana that was written by one of her Bolognese compatriots in the 17th century, Count Carlo Cesare Malvasia, who wrote the lives of the Bolognese painters, and he provides a really serious and informative biography. I think she's kind of a turning point in many respects, not only in Bologna, but also generally in Italy, because she's successful. She falls into the category that most early modern women artists were placed into, and that is portraiture was really understood as a more acceptable and even appropriate specialization for women artists. But she produces both portraits and public pictures, religious pictures, altarpieces, things like that. Although by most early writers, she is celebrated for her portraits. And I think this is only partially related to the quality of her works. I think there was a prejudice that women were just better suited to what was viewed as a less challenging art form that required less sort of creativity and inventiveness. For Malvasia, the great hero, female hero of the story, was Elisabetta Cerrani, who lived in the 17th century, who knew Malvasia personally and who tragically dies very young. She has about a 10-year career. She lives to be only 27 years old, but she becomes extraordinarily famous, especially as what we call a history painter. Sirani made relatively few portraits. Her work is principally pictures that are based on a text, primarily religious, but she also does subjects from ancient history, such as her marvelous painting of Portia wounding her thigh. It's a great example of Sirani's inventiveness as a woman artist in ways that can be linked to her particular circumstances, both as a woman and as a citizen of Bologna. Sirani, like her sister artists, really benefited from a widespread interest in artistic patronage and collecting that was not just limited to the very upper crust classes in Bologna. People from lower and middle income sectors of Bolognese society became avid collectors and commissioners of art, particularly in the 17th century. And one of those, Simone Tassi, who was a successful businessman, was an avid collector of Sirani's works. He was a silk merchant, and Sirani cleverly references the vocation of her patron in this story about the wife of Brutus, Portia, who wounded herself in her thigh to prove to her husband that she was worthy of his confiding the plot to assassinate Caesar in his wife. This is a rare subject to begin with, but Sirani's approach is completely unprecedented. She shows us women spinning thread. In the background, they are performing conventionally female tasks, whereas in the foreground, Portia does something that's exceptional for a woman. She's wounding her thigh. And one of the things I came to realize about this painting was that she's not using a knife to injure herself. It's actually an embroidery tool. And so she's using a woman's instrument to perform a man's task. And at the same time, she's referencing the vocation of her patron. So I think this is the kind of originality and inventiveness that Cerrany possessed that really appealed to her many, many patrons.
While we're on the subject of patrons, Babette, can I ask you about female patrons? Were there a lot of female patrons? How important were they in Bologna? And was this a factor in the rise of women artists?
That's a great question, Nicola, and it's absolutely a critical factor for Lavinia Fontana. Malvasia says it was really the local noblewomen in Bologna who made Lavinia a famous and sought-after artist and drove up her prices to very high levels. She is recorded as the portraitist for a number of noblewomen, and she was stupendous at capturing the details of their rich fabrics and jewels. Their little dogs also are a barometer of high socioeconomic status. But interestingly, I think that circumstance changes by the time we get to Elisabetta Cerrani, who is active almost a half century after Lavinia Fontana's death. Sirani did have some significant female patrons, but most of her recorded patrons are actually men. That also, I think, is connected to the fact that she, compared to Lavinia Fontana, produces very few painted portraits.
I wanted to come back to Lavinia Fontana for a minute. I mean, the other thing which is remarkable is that she paints naked women. It's quite unusual, isn't it? They're not allowed at this point to attend life classes, and yet she is painting naked women. And what seems to be a portrait of one of her patrons, Isabella Ruini, as Venus.
Yes, it's a wonderful portrait, and it is very unusual. And I think it's important that scholars have really only recently begun to ask serious questions about this issue. Ruini was an upper crust Bolognese noblewoman. So it certainly is striking and almost bewildering that a woman of that status would have allowed herself to be portrayed in, we don't see her full nude body, but we see the transparent bodice that shows her breasts and her nipples. I will say most of the other depictions of nude female figures are paintings that have only been coming to light in recent years. And to be totally frank, I'm not 100% certain that they're all autograph. Bologna is a pretty conservative place. I mean, it's right at the heart of the Counter-Reformation. There were some very controlling archbishops. So I would say the jury is still out.
Can we just finish on the question of self-portraits? Can you say something about what self-portraits meant for these women?
I think it's one of the really fascinating questions about women artists in this period. And I would say there are actually a number of categories of self-portraiture for women, sometimes with allegorical subjects. For example, both Lavinia Fontana and Elisabetta Cerrani portray themselves as Judith, this Old Testament apocryphal heroine who decapitates the Assyrian general Holofernes, who's an enemy of the Israelites. It's not a straightforward self-portrait, but it's one in which they're associating themselves with an exceptional woman from the historical past. And there are a number of those I would call historicizing type of self-portraits. There also is a strong tradition in Italy in male self-portraiture showing the artist as a gentleman, or if it's a woman artist, obviously, as a gentlewoman. And I would put the self-portraits with musical instruments by women into that category. Lavinia Fontana and Elisabetta Cerrani both produce that type of self-portrait. And they're also more straightforward portrait of the artist as an artist. Those really become more popular in the 17th century. But we have examples by Lavinia Fontana, Elisabetta Cerrani, and also by one of Sirani's less well-known successors, Lucrezia Scarfaglia, before an easel painting. It's a straightforward, assertive statement that these women are working as professional painters. And we also have this Artemisia Gentileschi, probably idealized self-portrait of the artist as the allegory of painting. We also have an idealized self-portrait of Elisabetta Cerrani as the allegory of painting. It becomes a popular genre for, I think, promulgating this exciting and somewhat untraditional idea that women could be painters, could be inventive. One of the things about Sirani that I think is really important to her record and is unique to her is that she is the only Italian woman of this period who is explicitly famous for her drawings. Drawings in this period were understood as the places in which artists exercised their creativity and created their original inventions. So it's no coincidence that women were rarely celebrated for their drawings, that few drawings by women artists have survived, but we have well over 100 extant drawings by Elisabetta Cerrani, and her drawings were avidly collected during that period. So for me, that seems like a really exciting step forward in the appreciation of women artists and their capacity to be celebrated as the equals of their great male contemporaries.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much. There is so much more that I think we're going to be finding out over the next few years, thanks to scholars like you.
Thank you, Nicola. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.